and welcome to the third installment of the First World Symposium on Sustainable Transport and Livability podcast series. I'm Maneesha and I'll be your host for this session. In today's conversation, we are joined by Professor Aruna Sivakumar from the Centre of Transport Studies at Imperial College London. She is also the director of the Urban Systems Lab, leading various research initiatives focused on smart cities, transport accessibility, and energy demand modeling. Hi, Professor. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to the podcast. So let's talk about, we will start with London. London Tube is one of the world's oldest metro systems and has undergone significant modifications to meet the modern mobility demands. What have been the biggest challenges in modernizing such an extensive network while at the same time maintaining its service efficiency?
So, as you've pointed out, the London Tube network infrastructure is old, which means it has a complex signaling system. The geography is complex, so the space underground is actually physically congested. There's a lack of air conditioning, which is a bigger issue as we have more and more frequent high temperature events and so on. And to top all this, I've read somewhere that the London Underground is expected to cater to something like 15 million public transport journeys daily by 2041. So at the moment, there are a huge number of efforts on the part of London Underground in modernizing signaling systems in particular. And the importance is obvious. They have been causing delays already. And without modernizing these systems, these delays are just going to get worse. And so this modernization of the signaling systems is an absolutely essential task. However, it's also technically a complex task, both in terms of hardware and software. Funding needs are high. In addition to these signal system upgrades, there's also plans to introduce new trains, make track and station improvements, and improving the accessibility of stations with more step-free access, improving mobile connectivity on trains and in stations, and very importantly, addressing air quality concerns in the underground network, and so on. And the impacts of all of this will be in reducing journey times, increasing the frequency of the service. And so the London Underground have been sweeping these changes through the network in stages. So one of the important mechanisms that they've followed to minimize the disruption is to sweep these changes through the network in stages. It's inevitable that it will cause disruptions. And so they're working closely with other partners, local councils, the Greater London Authority, the Mayor's Office, that is, to ensure that work is scheduled on weekends, providing rail replacement services, in general, drawing on the richness of the public transport network that already exists in London. And there's a good bit of AI and data analytics involved in ensuring that these happen as smoothly as possible.
Like the magnitude of what is being done is like it's beyond imagination. So like if
Absolutely.
we look beyond the infrastructure also, London has brought about different policy steps to tackle these urban challenges. So one such I read about is the ultra low emission zone, which has been a landmark initiative in curbing pollution, influencing traffic patterns and air quality. So if you think about it, I can imagine the amount of opposition that might have happened at the initial stages. You know that when you look at London, from my point of view, one of your key strengths is the fact that there is a seamless integration between different modes of transport. And whenever you bring something new into the system, how do the governance make sure that it is inclusive and equitable?
It's in the intention to begin with. So, equitability and inclusivity are explicitly articulated objectives for all urban and transport plans across the UK. It's not just London, it is an explicit objective in all transport plans across the UK. TfL in particular, Transport for London that is, has a well thought through plan called Equity in Motion that focuses on buses, walking, and cycling. And in fact, London was one of the first cities to pioneer the use of accessibility metrics for public transport planning. Is called actually PTALs, or the Public Transport Accessibility Levels. And the aim of PETALs or PTALs, different people call it different things, was to ensure that the public transport system is reaching out to the population segments across London equitably. And more recently, there's been an increased focus on accessible infrastructure. This is physical accessibility, step free access, etc., and improving inclusion by focusing on underserved areas. So it's the intention of building equitability and inclusivity in all the transport plans and strategies. And in addition, a rich sort of ecosystem of charities and NGOs that focus on equitable access to sustainable transport that work closely with the planning authorities also play an important role. Some examples are Sustrans, Cycling UK, and so on.
So I know that you have extensive experience in different sectors as well as personal experience in living in different parts of the world. So from your observations, how do the mobility and sustainability challenges different across the world? Like let's say we consider the case of London, which is a global city, and we have a lot of rapidly urbanizing cities in India. How do the challenges differ between these two places?
I think the fundamental difference is in total population and population density, right? So Indian cities deal with high populations, high population densities, and that is always going to be a significant challenge for urban and transport planning. Fundamentally, the latent capacity in transport networks in cities like London is inevitably higher because they're dealing with lower population densities. So congestion means different things in these contexts. So the challenges are actually quite immense and significant in Indian cities. And the same is true for public transport. Although some Indian cities, large Indian cities, have excellent public transport networks, the public transport capacity in a city like London is a reasonable proportion of the population, which makes it a viable alternative. Whereas in Indian cities, a lot of people are captive transport mode users, primarily because these cities need even more infrastructure to meet the needs of the large populations. Now, having said that, despite all of the challenges, the problems can be addressed only with systematic planning of transport and land use systems. And these are some of the important things that planning authorities in Indian cities could adopt from the London or the UK context. Planning decisions are made based on sufficient evidence from reliable data and from reliable travel demand models. Moreover, aspects of safety, public health, and equity are core objectives of urban and transport planners. And this is where I think there's a lot to learn from cities like London. To take an example, the mayor's transport strategy in London sets out something called Vision Zero. This was a few years ago, where the idea was that London would have the goal that by 2041, all deaths and serious injuries will be eliminated from London's transport network. And strategies such as these actually make it easier for sustainable transport modes to thrive. When people feel the streets are safer, they walk and cycle more. This is another sort of very important and good piece of practice to adopt, in addition to things like accessibility based planning, which is safety, public health, and equity focus.
Leading from that, I think what we might be facing, one major issue, what Indian cities might be facing is how to bring about that balance of development and sustainability without compromising one and the other, which I think is London is doing better, obviously better than us. So, what role do you think demand modeling and smart city initiatives play in achieving this balance?
When you talk about achieving sort of sustainability in transport systems, we are talking about reduction in emissions. We're talking about shifting to low carbon transport, among other things, obviously. And this can no doubt be challenging when efficiency of transport underpins economic viability for businesses and livelihoods for people. But it's not an impossible dream. In fact, we are collectively, I think the world is slowly but surely moving towards it. And a big part of what makes this possible is data and planning based on data. I know I keep repeating data and planning, but they are the cornerstones of most new developments and shifts to sustainable transport policies. But in addition to that, I think we need to embrace technology and the advances that technology allows, both in terms of low carbon transport technology, which we all talk about, as well as artificial intelligence. These are all critical allies in achieving sustainable transport. So we need to be able to embrace the advantages that technology, data, and advanced modeling methods give us in order to manage that balance between sustainability and efficiency of the transport network. To give you an example, take the concept of on demand transit, the idea that public transport is not just from station A to station B, but it can actually take you more or less from door to door as long as you're able to use a mobile phone app, for instance, that works the same way that the Ubers and Olas of this world work, but is actually run by a public transport operator. Could be London buses, could be any of these city run operators. So the idea that an on demand transit service can be achieved efficiently to get public transport moving people efficiently while also being convenient is something that's feasible only when we embrace what technology can do for us, what data can do for us, what models can do for us. Equally, improving first and last mile solutions by deploying the shared micromobility services that are emerging. So these are the kind of things that we can embrace to counter the traditional notion that sustainable transport means not very efficient transport.
I have this doubt that, see, London has pioneered congestion pricing and low emission zones to manage urban traffic and pollution. So when we think about India, let's think we are trying to bring it into an Indian context. But given the distinct socio-economic and infrastructure realities of Indian cities, how feasible do you think it is to implement something similar here? And even if we get some leeway to it, what modifications or complementary measures would be needed to ensure their effectiveness?
See, to begin with, I'm going to straight away state that, in my opinion, congestion pricing and low emission zones are an important part of transport strategy for large cities. They directly address the real costs incurred from driving. They ensure that livable environments are generated in cities by improving air quality. So I think they're important policy strategies to adopt in large cities. But no doubt there are several challenges. A key challenge almost always is equity, ensuring that the population segments that will be the most affected have a viable alternative is the first and foremost important issue to address, which will need, as you pointed out, extensive improvements in the infrastructure, in particular public transport, walk and bike infrastructure, so that there is the capacity to make these viable alternatives. Equally, safety, ensuring that there is safety and lower risk of collision and accidents is an important part of ensuring that the infrastructure is capable of accommodating the population segments that will have to move away from driving as a result of such congestion pricing and low emission zones policies. Almost equally, there is a need to ensure robust monitoring and enforcement mechanisms, because without that, the pricing solution just will not work.
To fall back on, I think we are going back to the data and planning that you were talking about, the quality and quantity of data and very efficient planning is what we need. Thank you for sharing such valuable insights, Professor. So before we leave, as a final thought, what emerging technologies or policy shifts do you believe will shape the future of resilient and livable cities?
So I will use a term that is often used today, but I still think it's important. I think artificial intelligence and machine learning, without a doubt, will play a very important role in future resilient and livable cities, all the way from managing transport operations. So, for example, congestion and incident detection and prevention, to designing optimal on demand public transport services and the sensor networks that are needed in order to support such AI based systems is probably the most important emerging technological change. In terms of policies, policies supporting mixed use developments, supporting walkability and cyclability in cities, and ensuring there's more of an urban space or placemaking focus. These seem minor when you compare them to the huge technological changes. But again, in my opinion, I think this will be a key aspect for shaping future resilient and livable cities. Now, I'll just add one more thing, that in the context of Indian cities, as much as elsewhere, having a strong ecosystem of public sector, private sector organizations, but also charities and research institutes to support evidence driven urban and transport planning and policy will be absolutely essential in any of these endeavors.
Thank you, Professor. I had a great time talking with you today. We look forward to seeing you at the symposium.
Thank you.
Let's wrap up this episode of the WSSTL 2025 podcast. Thank you, Professor Sivakumar, for joining us and engaging with us in a thought-provoking conversation. We look forward to seeing you at the symposium. A big thank you to all of our listeners. For more details, don't forget to visit the symposium website. And for those of you who are attending the WSSTL symposium, remember the discussions will continue there. We will be back with more soon. Stay tuned.